Every system has corruption. So I guess the bigger question is, which system has more corruption? This one with central planning and worker cooperatives versus unfettered capitalism, or any flavor of capitalism.
I think any system has potential for corruption. I think it depends on like how good your civil service is, how much oversight do you have to resolve a problem once it arises.
How does corruption happen in a socialist system? So you have to, again, I apologize, but the large scale examples of it. So we can look at Soviet Union, China, and Sweden. Fundamentally different nations and histories and peoples and economic systems and political systems, but all could be called in part socialist. And so there's a ridiculous, almost caricature of corruption in the Soviet system, the gigantic bureaucracy that's built, where somehow corruption seeps in through kind of dispersion of responsibility, that nobody's really responsible for the corruption. I just had a conversation with Ed Calderon, who fought the cartels in Mexico, and there's a huge amount of corruption in Mexico, but it's not like even seen as corruption. You understand when the cop pulls you over, you give this much money, and so on. And so that kind of seems to happen in certain systems, and it seems to have happened in socialist systems more than in capitalist systems in the 20th century. Or maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, I mean, I think in a lot of countries, it's seen as the cost of doing business, right? Now, in particular countries built on a system of central planning or just state allocation of resources, where the state both produces and allocates and things run through bureaucracies, then I think you're much more apt to have corruption than in a system with just a smaller sphere for the state. So, for example, if you're in a hypothetical version of the US, you might see a lot more corruption in like the post office, but you wouldn't have that corruption in your workplace. So you kind of learn to go around that. For one thing, even in state sectors, you can have, and this often is the case in democratic countries, you have a transparent civil service where people who are corrupt are prosecuted by judges, where it's frowned upon, and it just, over time, it goes away. So you go from having political machines that were tied to certain, had friends in certain police precincts and whatever else in the US in the 19th century and early 20th century, to now today, that would be a huge scandal and unheard of, right? So I think over time, having a independent court system, having a truly meritocratic civil service can be implemented anywhere. I think, though, in the Soviet Union, the extra little bit that happened was you had a bureaucracy that just had so much power because the bureaucracy was producing and distributing everything, and everyone was relying on the bureaucracy for jobs. The way to social advancement was through the bureaucracies. So you end up with people like Khrushchev, people going from peasants to supreme leaders of countries just through like getting hooked up in the bureaucracy and advancing within it. And not all these were bad people. I don't think Khrushchev was that bad of a person, or Gorbachev. But this is their mechanism to advancement in systems like this. In the vision of democratic socialism that I propose, the state doesn't have that overriding power to begin with. But I think in either case, corruption has arose in many different systems and has been successfully dealt with. I think on the developmental trajectory of even countries today that we think of as being very corrupt, corruption will fade away as well. But you definitely need a system in which individuals are incentivized to act rationally. So if you're in a system in which cops who are corrupt are prosecuted and investigated, and there's internal controls, a civilian board review, and kind of an internal investigators within police departments or whatever else, there will be less corruption over time if people are punished. If you're in a system in which, if you're running a firm or you're the manager of a firm, an elected manager, and everyone at that firm is trying for more efficiency and trying for more excess profits or whatever else at the end of the day, dividends at the end of the day, then if you try to hire your nephew and he's not good at your job, you're not going to win re-election, right? So you shouldn't. I think no system should rely on a change in culture that come naturally or some sort of individual altruism. I think the systems have to be constructed in such a way that it's not rational to behave poorly.
In sort of from a theoretical perspective, either a socialist or capitalist system can have either culture. But it seems like if you prioritize meritocracy, if the people that are good, whatever the good means, in terms of integrity, in terms of performance, in terms of competence, it seems like that leads to a less corrupt system. And it seems like capitalism, there's all kinds of flavors of capitalism, but capitalism, because it does prioritize meritocracy, more often leads to less corruption. So that's not a question of political or economic systems. It's a question of what kind of stuff do you talk about that leads to a culture of less corruption?
First of all, I think in theory, maybe capitalism words meritocracy, but I think in practice, anyone watching this or you and me would think of some of the people we know that work the hardest, and they're often, working class people working in the food service industry or whatever else, right? I think we don't have in practice. I don't think we actually live in a society that rewards people for hard work. I think we reward people for a combination of accidents of birth plus hard work. So, yeah,
Let me push back
Mhm.
because yes, so I agree with you, but let me push back on a subtle point because I like to draw a difference between hard work and meritocracy. Because as a person who works really hard, like I work crazy hard, but I've also worked with a lot of people that are just much better than me. So hard work does not equal skill, good, productive. So I just want to kind of
Yeah.
draw that distinction. But I agree with you. I don't think our society rewards directly hard work or even high skill. There's many examples, at least we can see, that it does not do so.
So we have an unequal distribution of talent, of course. So if we lived in a society in which there was some level of acceptable inequality, and it's a normative kind of question of how much we would say is acceptable, right? And that inequality was based on this unequal distribution of talent, then I think that would be fine with me, right? That would actually be a meritocracy. What I see in the US is often, okay, so if you are a upper middle class or rich kid and you get a good education, K through 12, um, out of those people, there will be some that work extra hard and go on to do incredible things or are very successful, and there'll be other people that um, do not, right, and decide for whatever reason or go down a different path. And you could say maybe among that group of the upper middle class, there is a meritocracy, right? But they're actually given those opportunities to make their own decisions and to fail, whereas many other people, the vast majority of American society, I would say 60+%, don't really get those opportunities to make those choices to begin with. And I would aspire to the type of world, at least as a first step, in which our only inequalities are based on our unequal innate kind of distributions of talent.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people worry that when you have a socialist in any degree central planning, or perhaps a collective of workers, that it won't result in that kind of meritocracy that you're talking about. But you're saying that no, it's possible to have that kind of meritocracy.
Think about it this way: the workers themselves are incentivized and are shaped by market forces too, right? They're trying to respond to consumer needs and preferences. They're trying to expand market share. They're trying to make money. So it requires no kind of leap into these people are going to be more altruistic or whatever else, even on purely bourgeois terms, the same way you would maybe justify, competitive capitalist firms. I think you could justify this system as long as you think that people, elected management, can perform just as well. I think based on the experiences of cooperatives, we've seen that they can. Then at the state level, state bureaucracies have their own sort of sets of incentives, but in most systems that already have extensive state bureaucracies, these people at high levels are appointed or elected. They're held to certain standards. At the national level, a national government wants to maintain, the tax revenue that they need to pay for services. So we already, I think, have incentive structures that you could say that some people might just, I think, disagree with the normative thing of like, why would people have to own their own means of production, control their workplaces, or whatever else? Why do we need this level of equality? Um, can't we just get by with our existing system, but just like make things a little bit easier for capitalists to make money, and then everyone will benefit, or whatever else? I mean, that's a normative question. In my vision of socialism, there'll be plenty of, multiple parties with different views and perspectives trying to either push us deeper into more radical forms of socialism, or on the other hand, to kind of roll back to, more capitalist forms of government. So I think that, again, you can't try to make up a perfect system and try to implement it. You have to, do it as a process democratically, and so on.
So just philosophically, in your gut, you're more concerned about the innate equal value of human beings versus the efficiency of this wonderful mechanism that we call human civilization at producing cool stuff. Just like a gut, if we were sitting at a bar, that's where the gut feeling you come with. Of course, your mind is open, but you want to protect the equal value of humans.
So I don't want to fight the hypothetical. So I'll say equality. I am concerned with equality, but I don't think the two are necessarily always in tension. But also when you think about all the great things that human beings have produced, often I think people today just look at the end outcome. Like we go to the pyramids and we'll marvel at the pyramids and the human achievement that it took to make it happen, but we won't, stop to think about all the suffering that went into the making of that thing. So I think we kind of lean in the opposite direction, where we marvel at our achievements, but we don't often think about the suffering or exploitation that went into certain human achievements. I would love a society in which we could marvel at things and not have to worry about the exploitation that was involved, because there was no exploitation or oppression involved. There was just human ingenuity and creativity and collaboration.
And to the degree, which you may disagree, to the degree there's a tension between the two, at least give equal weight to the consideration of the suffering, and don't just marvel at the beauty of the creations. To the degree there is a tension between the two.
What Stalin did, actually, too, it's not just capitalists, but what Stalin did was he sacrificed whole generations because he thought that he was building something for the future, for future Russians to enjoy, and for future people of the world to enjoy. And actually, that analogy that I just gave about the pyramids was written by Karl Kautsky, the German socialist, anti-Stalinist critic, when he was complaining about U.S. journalists and others going to Russia in the 1930s and marveling at all the new industries. Are these people blind to the suffering, behind these things that they're marveling about?